Imagine this. You're standing in a crowded room, surrounded by laughter and warmth, yet you feel like you're watching through glass. Everyone else seems to know the secret language of belonging, moving through conversations with an ease that feels almost alien to you. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most profound and often misunderstood topics in psychology: the lifelong effect of not being loved in childhood. And stay with me until the very end, because the last insight, the final realization we'll uncover together, might change how you see not only your past, but the way you choose to love and heal in the present. Before we continue, if you believe that exploring the depths of the human mind and uncovering the roots of our emotional lives can bring real transformation, make sure to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. What we're about to discuss might not just inform you, it might awaken something inside you. When we speak about the absence of love in childhood, we're not just referring to cases of overt abuse or neglect. Often the deepest scars are formed in silence, in the moments when love was withheld, when affection was rationed, when emotional needs were met with indifference. You smile, you nod, you perform the rituals of connection, but beneath it all, there's a question that won't let go. Why does intimacy feel like standing at the edge of a cliff? Why does love, when it finally arrives, feel less like coming home and more like waiting for the inevitable betrayal? Now, imagine tracing that feeling back through the years of failed relationships, back through the patterns of self-sabotage, back through the chronic sense that something essential is missing. You arrive, finally, at a doorway you've spent your entire life avoiding. Behind it stands a child, silent, watching, waiting. That child is you, and they are still waiting for someone to see them, to hold them, to tell them they matter. But no one ever came. Not in the way they needed, not in the way that would have changed everything. Here's the paradox that haunts millions. The absence of something can be more powerful than its presence. We understand trauma that arrives with violence, with noise, with visible scars. But what do we do with the trauma of silence? The trauma of the love that never was? How do you mourn something you never had? How do you heal from a wound that has no name, no moment of origin? Just an endless emptiness that shaped you like water shapes stone, slowly, invisibly, irreversibly. The unloved child doesn't grow into an unloved adult. That would be too simple, too obvious. Instead, they grow into someone who has learned to translate the entire world through the lens of that absence. They become the overachiever who can never rest, the perfectionist who can never satisfy themselves, the helper who gives endlessly but cannot receive. They become the one who loves too much or not at all, who clings desperately or runs at the first sign of real intimacy. They become a master of disguise, so skilled at hiding their need that even they forget it's there. But here's what makes this particularly cruel. The child who wasn't loved doesn't just miss out on affection. They miss out on the fundamental experience that teaches them how to be human. Love in childhood isn't just about feeling good. It's the crucible where the self is forged. It's where we learn that our feelings matter, that our presence affects others, that we are worthy of care simply because we exist. Without it, we enter the world with a corrupted operating system, running faulty code that whispers, "You must earn your existence. You must prove your worth. You must never, ever show your real need." Think about the people you know who seem to have everything: success, beauty, intelligence, yet they're perpetually dissatisfied, chronically anxious, unable to enjoy what they've built. Consider those who cycle through relationships, always finding fatal flaws in partners who are willing to love them. Observe the ones who work themselves to exhaustion, who cannot sit still, who seem to be running from something they refuse to name. What if the thing they're running from isn't something that happened, but something that never did? This is the great, terrible secret that psychology is only beginning to fully understand. The unloved child creates an unloved adult, who then creates an unloved world. Not because they want to, but because they cannot give what they never received. They cannot trust what they never experienced. They cannot rest in love, because love, to them, has always been a test they somehow failed before they even knew they were taking it. So here's the question that should unsettle you, that should make you pause and look honestly at your own patterns. How much of who you are, your fears, your defenses, your very identity was built not on what you were given, but on what was withheld. How much of your life is still being dictated by that silent child who learned, long ago, that their needs were too much, their feelings were inconvenient, their very existence was conditional? And if that's true, if so much of your suffering stems from this invisible wound, then what would happen if you finally turned around and faced it? What would you find behind that door you've been avoiding your entire life? The answer to that question might be the most important thing you ever discover. Because on the other side of that door isn't just pain, it's also the possibility of freedom. The psychologist John Bowlby, father of attachment theory, wrote that a child's experience of an emotionally responsive caregiver is essential for building a secure base. Without that base, the world becomes unpredictable, relationships become threatening, and the self becomes fragmented. But here's what Bowlby understood that most people miss. A child who grows up without love doesn't stop needing it. They simply learn to hide that need so well that it becomes invisible even to themselves. This is where the true tragedy begins. Not in the absence of love itself, but in what that absence teaches. The unloved child becomes a philosopher by necessity, constructing elaborate theories about why they weren't loved. I wasn't good enough. I was too much. I was fundamentally flawed. These aren't just thoughts. They become the axioms upon which an entire life is built. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote that, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what happens when a child's why becomes corrupted at its source? When the fundamental question isn't, why should I live, but why wasn't I loved? The psychiatrist Alice Miller called this the drama of the gifted child. The child who learns to be perfect, helpful, or invisible just to survive emotionally in an unloving environment. They develop what we might call a false self, a carefully constructed personality designed to meet the needs of others, while their true self withers in the darkness, unexpressed and unseen. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps, discovered that humans can endure almost anything if they find meaning in their suffering. But the unloved child's suffering has no meaning they can grasp. It simply is a fundamental condition of their existence that shapes everything that follows. But the psychological roots go even deeper than neuroscience can measure. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject and repress because they were unacceptable to those we depended on. For the unloved child, almost everything authentic becomes shadow. Their needs become shadow. Their anger becomes shadow. Their very existence, in its raw, unfiltered form, becomes something to hide. And so, they construct what Jung called a persona, a mask they show the world, while their true self remains locked away, unknown even to themselves. Arthur Schopenhauer understood that human suffering stems from the will, the blind, insatiable force that drives us to seek and to want. But for the unloved child, the will becomes twisted around an impossible object, the love that was never given. They spend their lives reaching for something that exists only as an absence, a phantom that haunts every relationship, every achievement, every moment of potential happiness. No matter what they accomplish, no matter who loves them now, that original absence echoes through everything, a void that nothing can fill, because it was carved when the self was still forming. Jean-Paul Sartre declared that existence precedes essence, that we create ourselves through our choices. But the unloved child faces a devastating constraint on their freedom. They make choices, yes, but those choices are made by a self that was forged in deprivation, shaped by absence. How free is the choice when the chooser was programmed by neglect to believe they are unworthy? How authentic is the self when it was constructed as a defense mechanism rather than an expression of being? This is the hidden problem in its fullest form. The absence of love in childhood doesn't just create pain. It creates a distorted lens through which all subsequent experience is filtered. It programs the mind with faulty beliefs, the body with chronic vigilance, and the spirit with a question that has no answer. What was wrong with me? And because this happens before language, before conscious memory, before the self has fully formed, it operates beneath awareness, silently directing the life from the shadows. The truly insidious nature of childhood emotional deprivation reveals itself in adulthood through patterns so subtle they seem like personality traits rather than wounds. You see it in the person who can't accept a compliment without immediately deflecting or discounting it. You see it in the one who achieves extraordinary success, but feels like a fraud waiting to be exposed. You see it in relationships where love is offered freely, yet the recipient finds reasons to doubt it, test it, or ultimately destroy it. This is cognitive bias in its most devastating form. The unloved child develops what psychologists call a negativity bias on steroids. Their brain becomes exquisitely attuned to rejection, abandonment, and disappointment while remaining paradoxically blind to genuine care. When someone loves them, their mind searches for evidence that it's temporary, conditional, or false. When someone hurts them, even accidentally, it confirms what they've always known. See, I was right not to trust. This is confirmation bias weaponized against the self, a mental filter that only lets through data that reinforces the original wound. The neuroscientist Bruce Perry explains that the brain is a social organ, wired to connect and mirror emotional attunement. But when a child grows up without consistent affection, their mirrored neurons, the very cells responsible for empathy and connection, learn to expect indifference rather than warmth. Their nervous system becomes calibrated to emotional scarcity. As adults, even when surrounded by people who care, their internal alarm system keeps firing. This isn't safe. This won't last. Don't get comfortable. It's like having a smoke detector that goes off when you light a candle, mistaking warmth for danger because it was programmed in a house that only knew fire. Consider the adult who constantly seeks validation from partners, from bosses, from strangers on social media. Each like, each compliment, each sign of approval becomes a temporary salve for the wound that never heals. But external validation is like drinking salt water to quench thirst. It creates a dependency while deepening the original need. The more they seek it, the more they need it, and the less satisfied they become. This is the hedonic treadmill applied to emotional survival, running faster and faster towards something that recedes with every step. Others take the opposite path, what psychologists call counter-dependent attachment. They reject love before it has the chance to reject them. They end relationships early, push people away, or numb their emotions entirely through work, substances, or perpetual distraction. D.W. Winnicott wrote that it is a joy to be hidden, but a disaster not to be found. These individuals have become masters of hiding, but they've convinced themselves they don't want to be found. Their independence isn't freedom. It's a prison they've built to feel safe, mistaking isolation for strength because connection once meant pain. The cultural conditioning around this only makes it worse. We live in a society that valorizes self-sufficiency, that tells us to get over it, to move on, to not be too sensitive. We're taught that emotional needs are weaknesses, that asking for help is failure, that true strength means needing no one. For the unloved child who grew into an adult, these messages feel like permission to keep doing what they've always done. Hide the wound, suppress the need, perform normalcy while dying inside. Society becomes an accomplice to their suffering, reinforcing the very patterns that keep them trapped. And here's perhaps the cruelest consequence. Many who were unloved in childhood unconsciously recreate those dynamics in their adult relationships. They're drawn to partners who are emotionally unavailable, distant, or inconsistent, not because they want pain, but because familiarity feels like home, even when home was cold. Their unconscious mind says, "This feeling I know. This abandonment I understand. This rejection is what love has always felt like." Breaking free requires not just choosing differently, but recognizing that what feels right might be precisely what's wrong. Here's the radical truth that changes everything. The wound you carry isn't a life sentence. It's information. And information, once understood, loses its power to control you unconsciously. The first act of rebellion against an unloved childhood is the most counterintuitive one. You must stop trying to heal the past and start creating a new present. Carl Rogers discovered something revolutionary in his therapeutic work. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. This isn't self-help platitude, it's neurological fact. The brain cannot rewire itself while in a state of self-rejection. Every time you shame yourself for your patterns, every time you berate yourself for not being over it yet, you're recreating the original wound. You become both the unloved child and the unloving parent, locked in an internal reenactment that ensures nothing changes. The rebellion begins with a single devastating realization. The absence of love was never about your worthiness. It was about the emptiness of those who couldn't give what they themselves never received. Your parents, your caregivers, they were likely once unloved children too, carrying their own invisible wounds, perpetuating cycles they didn't understand. To recognize this isn't to excuse them. It's to free yourself from the false belief that their inability to love you meant something about your value. It didn't. It never did. This is what researcher Kristen Neff calls self-compassion. Not the sentimental notion of being nice to yourself, but the fierce practice of treating your wounds with the same tenderness you would offer to anyone suffering. When fear arises, you don't shame it away. You acknowledge it. This fear makes sense. I learned early that love was dangerous. When you fail, you don't spiral into self-hatred. You respond with understanding. I'm doing my best with the tools I have. This is reparenting, becoming the caregiver you never had, showing up for yourself with consistency, kindness, and unwavering presence. Modern research in psychotherapy, particularly the work of Dr. Sue Johnson and Dr. Peter Levine, confirms that the nervous system can be rewired through new experiences of safety and connection. Neuroplasticity isn't just a buzzword. It's the brain's ability to form new pathways, to learn that love can exist without pain, that connection doesn't always end in abandonment. But this requires something most people find terrifying: vulnerability. You must allow yourself to be seen, even when every instinct screams to hide. You must reach out, even when rejection feels inevitable. You must stay present when love is offered, resisting the urge to test it, destroy it, or run from it. Think of those who broke free from their conditioning throughout history. Viktor Frankl chose meaning in a concentration camp. Nelson Mandela chose forgiveness after 27 years of imprisonment. Maya Angelou transformed childhood trauma into poetry that liberated millions. What did they all understand? That the past creates you, but it doesn't have to define you. That you can acknowledge the wound without letting it become your identity. That freedom begins the moment you stop waiting for the world to give you what it withheld and start cultivating it within yourself. The ultimate act of rebellion is this: to love anyway. To love yourself fiercely, even when you feel unlovable. To love others openly, even when it terrifies you. To choose connection over protection, presence over performance, authenticity over approval. This isn't naive optimism, it's revolutionary defiance. You're refusing to let your wound dictate your destiny. You're ending the cycle that could have continued through you into the next generation. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." The chaos of an unloved childhood, the confusion, the longing, the silence can, when understood, give rise to something luminous. The ability to love consciously, not out of need or fear, but out of awareness. This is the final truth that redefines everything. The absence of love in childhood does not define your destiny. It defines your mission. Think about what this means. Every person who grows up without love carries a unique understanding of its value. They know, in their bones, what it costs to live without it. They understand the weight of silence, the ache of invisibility, the desperation of performing for scraps of affection. And because they know this, they have the capacity to love in ways that those who were never deprived cannot comprehend. Their sensitivity, once a source of pain, becomes their greatest gift. Their hunger for connection, once a weakness, becomes their superpower. Consider the people throughout history who transformed their wounds into wisdom. The poet Leonard Cohen sang, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." Your crack, that place where love should have been but wasn't, is not a defect. It's a portal. Through that opening, you can access depths of empathy, compassion, and understanding that those with easier childhoods may never reach. The wound becomes the doorway to your purpose. But here's where it gets truly profound. You were never actually unlovable. You were simply surrounded by people who could not yet love beyond their own wounds. Their inability to give love says nothing about your worth and everything about their pain. They were likely unloved children themselves, caught in cycles they didn't understand, passing down emptiness like an inheritance they never chose to give. When you grasp this, truly grasp it, forgiveness becomes possible. Not necessarily for them, but for yourself. You forgive yourself for believing you were unworthy, for repeating old patterns, for staying too long in pain. You forgive because you finally see that you were only ever trying to find love in the ways you knew how. And now you know a better way. Love is not a reward to be earned. It is a state of being. It is presence, awareness, acceptance. It is the courage to open your heart even after it has been broken, to extend kindness where bitterness once lived, to choose connection over defense. When you begin to love from this place, from wholeness rather than emptiness, relationships transform. You no longer seek someone to complete you. You seek someone to share your completeness. You no longer fear rejection because you no longer reject yourself. Here's the spiritual dimension that psychology alone cannot capture. Even in the moments when love was absent from people, you were never truly alone. Life itself, the breath moving through you, the sun that rose each morning, the invisible current that sustained you through every dark night was an act of love. Existence carried you even when people did not. The universe, in its quiet way, has always loved you. You are here, after all. Against all odds, through all pain, you survived. That survival itself is evidence of love. Cosmic, impersonal perhaps, but love nonetheless. When you understand this, something shifts at the deepest level of your being. You realize that the love you've been seeking has been with you all along, woven into the very fabric of your existence. You stop waiting for permission to love yourself. You stop needing validation to feel worthy. You become the source of the love that was once denied to you. And in doing so, you discover the most paradoxical truth of all. The greatest power of love is that it can be born from its own absence. Every time you comfort your inner child, every time you choose empathy instead of anger, every time you show compassion to another person who's suffering, you are rewriting generations of pain. You are changing history from within. What once felt like a curse becomes your greatest gift. You become the parent, the friend, the lover, the teacher that the world needs precisely because you know the cost of a loveless life. Your sensitivity becomes your strength. Your wound becomes your wisdom. Your absence becomes your source. Imagine looking into a mirror now and seeing not the wounded child, not the person defined by rejection, but the being who survived it all, the one who kept moving, who kept feeling, who kept hoping. That reflection is not broken. It's evidence of extraordinary resilience. You are not what was withheld from you. You are what you choose to give now. And what you choose to give has the power to heal not only yourself but everyone you touch. The unloved child becomes the awakened adult. The wound becomes the wisdom. The absence becomes the source. You are here to end the cycle. You are here to give to yourself and to others the love that was once denied. You are here to prove that love is not inherited, it is created, and in creating it, you become living proof that healing is real, that transformation is possible, that the human spirit can not only survive deprivation but transcend it. So, let this be your declaration. You were unloved, yes, but you are not unlovable. You are love itself, learning to remember its own nature. And as you live this truth, the world changes around you. Because the greatest act of rebellion against a loveless past is to love freely in the present. Not the naive love that expects to be completed, but the mature love that arises from completeness. Not the desperate love that clings, but the conscious love that liberates. The absence of love in your childhood was never the end of your story. It was the beginning of your awakening. And that awakening, that moment when you finally choose to love yourself, to heal yourself, to become the source of what you never received, is the most powerful thing you will ever do. It is your gift to yourself. It is your gift to the world. It is the dancing star born from chaos, the light entering through the crack, the love that rises from its own absence. This is who you are. This is who you've always been. Welcome home.